Okay, let's get started. Jamie, can you hear me okay up there? Sounds good. All right, good morning and welcome. Welcome to our E2Tech Forum on Organics, Residual Separation and Processing in the Solid Waste Stream. I'm Patrick Coughlin. I'm the Vice President of E2Tech, and I will serve as the moderator for today's session. In June, E2Tech sponsored a forum on the waste hierarchy, looking at landfills and waste-to-energy facilities. This is a follow-up to that talk where we look at the other 4 parts of the solid waste management hierarchy in Maine. We've got the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, recycle, and of course the big C for composting. In January, DP gave an update to the legislature on solid waste management and recycling in Maine. Here's a couple interesting facts from that report. It's estimated that municipal solid waste, also known as MSW or trash to folks who may be new to this term, that the amount that we send to landfills and to waste energy plants can be further reduced. They say that approximately 22% of that MSW waste stream can be directly recycled, metal, plastics, paper, etc. And about 38% of that is compostable organics. The remaining 40% is probably better off going to the landfill. So just by improving recycling programs and composting, it's possible to cut our trash generation by more than half the current rates. So another point, in Maine we generate about 1,000 pounds of MSW per person per year. Well, that may sound high. It is actually the lowest rate in New England, probably no doubt in part to the frugal nature of Mainers. Massachusetts and Rhode Island top the list. They generate almost double that rate, almost 2,000 pounds per person per year in Rhode Island. In Maine, overall, we've established a recycling goal of 50% across the state. So looking at 2012 numbers, we're not doing too bad. We're at, depending on whether you count construction and demolition wood that's burned for energy recovery, we're somewhere between 40 to 42%. We've got a ways to go, and our speakers today are going to tell us how we're going to get there. So first, I'd like to thank our sponsors. We have 2 silver sponsors, Eaton Peabody and St. Germain Collins. Someone here from Eaton Peabody today? There we go. Thank you very much. And St. Germain Collins, I know I saw Mark and Melissa and me, thanks. We also would like to thank our annual sponsors, Fairchild Semiconductor, Maine Biz, 19 Oaks, and TRC. Folks from those organizations here, thank you very much. So round of applause for our sponsors. Thank you. And we'd also like to thank Perkins Thompson as the Fall 2014 student sponsor. And on that note, we welcome students today from South Portland High School Ecology class, which has been leading the charge in reducing waste at their school and started composting last spring. Is that right? All right. There we go. Good job. So thank you for joining us today. There will be a quiz after this, so pay attention. And now to briefly introduce our panel. Additional biographical information is available on the pamphlets that were on your seats. Students, of course, take note of the fine colleges that these folks have attended as part of their biographies. Jay Kilborn. Jay has been working on recycling organics pretty much at the same business unit for 25 years now, navigating his way through name and ownership changes. His title now is Vice President at Casella Organics. He started with a bachelor's degree from Wesleyan University in Connecticut. Andrew Carpenter. Like Jay, Andrew has been working on recycling organics residuals for over 20 years and is currently a principal at Northern Tilth. Andrew is also the president of the Northeast Biosolids and Residuals Association, and he received his master's degree from the University of Maine. Kendall Hinckley. Kendall is the Community Outreach Director of Garbage to Garden and a graduate of Washington University in St. Louis and, of course, the more prestigious school of the Maine Compost School. After working overseas, including a portable composting toilet business for events and disaster areas, she's happy to be back in Maine. And Alex Pine. Alex is Maine Standard Biofuels Manager of Outreach and Technology, and he's a recent graduate of the College of Atlantic in Bar Harbor. And now for the talks. So each speaker will have approximately 15 minutes. We'll go in the order I just introduced them, and I will try to signal them if they start going over too far, but we have a little bit of latitude. And then we will save questions and answers to the end, and you can direct them to any of the panelists at that time. So, without further ado, we can go ahead and get the presentation up and start with Jay. Thank you.
Good morning. This is a full house. This is great. So I hope you brought your rotten tomatoes, especially Chuck and Jamie, who I'm sure to offend, and Mac probably not. But if you did bring them, please throw them into Kendall's bucket. Just hold it up. All right. So thanks for that introduction, Pat. I'm also on the board of the Northeast Biosolids and Residuals Association, and by the way, also wear the hat as a board member at Kennebunk-Clayton Power District. So looking at these issues from a number of perspectives, kind of a holistic view. So a couple of quick introductory slides. Casella Resource Solutions provides resource management solutions, and I'm going to talk a bit about that, to about 200,000 customers in 39 states. We have revenues of about $500 million. We're a publicly traded NASDAQ company, and we're based in Rutland, Vermont. It's a regional company for the most part. We recycle almost 1 million tons a year of traditional recyclables and residual organics. Casella Organics itself was founded in 1983 under the name of Resource Conservation Services by a local guy named Bill Ginn, who used to be the executive director of Maine Audubon. So we have an environmental beginning. He started the business with one pickup truck, collecting wood ash from one paper mill and applying it to his farm as a source of potassium, phosphorus, and lime. From that grew a company that now manages over 800,000 tons a year of residual organics material. I would just say we use several different technologies to recycle these materials, including composting, anaerobic digestion, and licensed land application programs. And so we're also involved, as well as in providing fertilizers and soil products, generating energy. I'll talk a little about that. And we sell under the EarthLife trade name, so some of these products are actually certified for use on organic farms, and others are not. So, many of you may remember several months ago we were here talking about solid waste. And in the last session there was a good bit of talk about combustion, waste to energy versus landfill disposal, and other legacy models of managing waste. So while these disposal options are probably necessary going forward, this is not where we as a company, or I think we as a group here or as a society, are trying to get. So we're charged with telling you how to get there. I think that's a tall task, but I got a couple of ideas for you. So, to speak to those two quickly, waste to energy is relying on heavily on burning fossil fuels in the form of plastics, burning organics that could be recycled. That part of the energy produced is not really renewable energy and has a negative greenhouse gas effect. Landfills, on the other hand, which we actually own and manage, don't burn fossil fuels and plastic, but they do sequester the plastics that could be recycled forever in a hole. Not a good thing, rather than recycling them. And they enable continuing wasteful practices with often cheap disposal. The energy they capture may be truly renewable, as it's derived from current carbon, but the nutrients and the residual organic materials are also entombed in this hole forever. So not a great solution going forward. What I'd like to talk about is, first, the opportunity that residuals present. Been a lot of talk about MSW or trash. Second, some strategies for getting beyond the legacy model of waste management and looking at resource management. Third, several, if we have time, success stories around resource management. And lastly, a caution about the ambiguities of what we do and the recognition that there's no perfect solution. So I think this is a rather striking slide. If you look at the table on the left, this is just about MSW and also comparing to biosolids, which is the sludge that comes out of wastewater treatment that meets health and safety criteria for recycling. You can see 250 million tons a year of MSW in the United States roughly generated, and about 14.5% on average, it's an order of magnitude number, is food waste that's entrained in MSW. Interesting that the amount of biosolids standardized for a certain solids content are about the same as the amount of food waste that's entrained in our MSW nationally, of course. If you step over to this slide and add industrial byproducts, which you might think are included in waste, MSW waste, in fact they're not. We're looking at, in the millions, we're looking at 7.5 billion tons of industrial byproducts along the way to the products that we consume and then throw the residual in the MSW stream. That number right there is a 1980s number. I'm not aware that the studies have been updated since then, so even if you cut it in half because of efforts on the part of industry to move towards sustainability, it's still a huge number and a huge opportunity. So focusing on resource management, as I promised, I'm going to give a little bit of history. Many of you probably know this, some of you probably haven't thought about it in a while, and I do think it's relevant to what we're trying to do. I guess, I would like to step back just one step. I've been talking about residual organics, and I'd like to explain that a little bit. When I'm using the word organic, I'm going to try and distinguish between organic, certified organic, and organic that's the broader concept of derived from something that was once alive. And that's generally when I'm talking about residual organics. That's what I'm talking about. So some of those residuals would include biosolids, wood ash, limestone products, food processing scraps, fats, slurries, and certain sludges. So we'll come back to that. But I wanted to clarify exactly what kinds of materials I'm talking about. That's a subset of that huge towering industrial byproducts, where, by the way, there are recycling opportunities even outside of the organic, not certified stream. So during the first 2/3 of the 20th century, most of us were enjoying the chorus of, we're going to the dump. This was the legacy model. It was based on cheap energy, little apparent cost to our own wastefulness. We were reliant on cheap disposal. It was simple to throw something away over an embankment down into a stream, call it a dump. But by the 80s, 90s, and 2000, these dumps were a problem. In fact, our company cleaned up more than 100 of these dumps using custom blended soils from these residual organic materials that we're going to talk a little more about, and substituting those custom soils for stripping Maine farmland, purchasing it for $4 a cubic yard and using it to close a dump. So just a sidebar. So in the middle of the 20th century, in the 50s through the 70s, we had a reemergence of an environmental movement. It really changed our thinking, recognizing waste as a contamination, and initially drove upgrades to the way we handled waste, not necessarily changing the legacy thinking about waste. So these are the things that happened all in a groundswell. We launched the EPA. CERCLA laws came into being, which were about Superfund and contaminated waste, toxic waste. RCRA, Resource Conservation and Recovery, addressing landfills and other aspects of waste management. the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. All of these things were happening in that period, 70s. So a lot of capital was invested in collection, in landfills, and incineration, and wastewater plants, and other areas to move us forward from this waste disposal paradigm. Then, in the 70s and 80s, in the 80s and 90s, really, recycling came of age. We added that, and we started talking about product stewardship or extended producer responsibility for products. Still fairly narrow, talking about what are we going to do with these products when they're done. And it was only then that thought leaders were embracing this transformative notion, I would say, of sustainability, of resource management, and only really as the extent globally of the environmental problems became apparent that we were causing as humankind. So then we started thinking about the fact that we have a small planet. There really isn't any way, and we stepped beyond this, well, you're going to be responsible for your computer at the end of the process. We still are looking at that, but conceptually we're beyond that. And so coming out of this history, resource management became a concept as well as sustainability. And this is about closing loops. It's about striving for zero waste. It's about mimicking nature, doing things nature's way rather than the way we have been doing them. And it's a vision and a strategy of waste management that we're trying to move forward, and as are others in the waste field. So in a practical sense, this means we're working with our customers upstream to design or redesign their industrial and business and even processes in your homes for the purposes of achieving zero waste and efficient recycling and reuse systems. So we're well past the point where you look at a schematic, engineer's schematic, no offense to the engineers, and the sidebar says to landfill. Right? Some of you, I'm sure, remember those days. Although it's great for landfills because the old legacy model almost demanded that we generate waste to return on the capital that we invested in our landfills. So there is that contradiction. So the process of resource management can be as simple as just the efficient segregation at an industrial plant of recyclables by specialists, taking it seriously, getting the job done. Or it can be as complicated as reformulating a product to enable the residual byproduct of the industry to then be reused, recycled, and to have a purpose, and to truly be a resource, to think of it as a resource. So in summary, economic and environmental reasons are driving this. Resource management considers whole systems and views the inputs, the raw materials, the energy, as a valuable resource rather than a cheap material that can leave us with a legacy throwaway model. And we have to use them efficiently, try and mimic nature in the way we do things so that we have minimizing our byproducts, and we're also generating byproducts that have a use and are a true resource. So you can see the hierarchy up here is the current EPA hierarchy. It's a little different from what it used to be and worth noting. I wanted to take, I think probably for time, we'll just take 3 examples rather than all 4 here. But there are many practical examples of resource management. I think this takes the concept and brings it to practical reality of what are waste management or resource management companies trying to do today. And the drivers, again, of this process are reducing cost and increasing profitability for our customers, responding to our customers' demand for green solutions to their waste problems, and in their products and services. Regulatory and public policy are also driving this, and of course corporate sustainability missions, some of which have come out of that history that I was just talking about. So let's start with a biomass power plant. We have them here in Maine. Northern New England is known for them. Their product is electricity, but of course their byproduct is wood ash. So upstream, and we work with a number of these plants, we've continued to work over the years to help them to be sure that their process is such that their end product can become an ash that's suitable for certified organic farm use. So it's not that hard, but it does take some significant steps. if you're going to be taking recycled wood, you've got to make sure it's 100% clean. So you've got to manage that process. Generally, these plants only work with virgin wood now to have an organic product. So fuel mix is important. There's a conditioning process for ash so that you can actually manage it at the end of the process. If it's not conditioned in an appropriate manner, it could become contaminated and then is no longer suitable for organic farms. So that's a process that we work. Part of this is getting your customers, our customers, to understand that they're part of a whole system and to think about that. So that's not a big, hard fix, but it's an important one. And lastly, they also have clean air technology at these power plants. And sometimes in addressing the exhaust from these plants, they can inadvertently, without really thinking about it, create a problem for the quality of the ash. So on 3 counts, we're working upstream, collaborating with our customers to figure out how to make those products more usable. And so downstream, the success here is that in that process, without any further processing, we're able to use the wood ash, just like you would maybe from your fireplace, as a soil amendment. A second example is what we're doing with wastewater treatment plants. Perhaps a little more controversial, but nonetheless, a really good example of a sustained effort at resource management that's involved the public sector, public policy. So we've had wastewater plants since we started thinking about not throwing our sludge into rivers and streams. But over the years, there's been developed a body of regulatory structure, in particular Chapter 40 CFR 503, federal regulations that govern the quality of biosolids that come out of these plants. In addition, other regulations around wastewater plants that have ensured that now wastewater systems have the ability to have some control upstream over what comes into their plant, and therefore what goes out into the water that they're cleaning up and what goes into the sludge at the end of the process, or the biosolids. So that's called industrial pretreatment, and it creates that collaborative upstream relationship with a hammer. It says this has to get done right, or you're going to kill the bugs in our system and we won't have a biosolids that we can recycle. There's a whole lot of history there, but net, that's the way it works. Most recently here in Maine, there was an effort, similar kind of an effort that I would call a resource management effort towards continuously improving the quality of the system and the quality of the biosolids. And that was an attempt to educate people about flushable wipes, which technically speaking, most of them are not actually flushable if you care about how MAC's system works downstream. And sometimes people don't think about that because this idea of throw it away is still prevalent. Also at the plant, there are steps that are taken. Wastewater treatment plants typically have screens to remove any trash that may have arrived in the process. And also steps have been taken over the years now to reduce the quantity of biosolids by extracting water through more sophisticated methods of dewatering, so that we're actually reducing the quantity of this waste, now a resource in many cases. So when we're successful downstream, we have created an exceptional quality, according to the 503 regulations, biosolids that can be applied to farms for fertilization, for soil amendment, for carbon content, and fiber. So that, I would say, is a long-term success story. It's been, the 503s were promulgated in the early 80s, 90s, in the early 90s. And it was a watershed event. So last example I want to talk about, a couple of people asked me about anaerobic digestion before the presentation. Let's go there. So Casella is fortunate in that we are part owners, operators, and we procure the incoming feedstock for 2 anaerobic digesters that are farm-based in Massachusetts. The one on the screen here is a digester located at a 300-head milking head dairy farm, the Jordan Farm in Rutland, Massachusetts. This digester, which you see the dome in the back, is really just a large tank with mixers. It's actually fairly simple. Oxygen and air is kept out of the tank. We inject the manure from the cows on the farm, and we bring food processing byproducts from a variety of food processors that are close enough to haul the material in. For example, Cane's Foods, Hood's Ice Cream, etc. Most of these processors, although they are working to reduce their waste, have food processing byproducts. The AD system itself, through the process of digestion, generates a biogas, which is an energy source, and a fertilizer at the end of the process. So the biogas, which is about 65% methane, is cleaned up and injected into an engine, runs a generator, and produces power for the farm and also for the grid. Massachusetts has a net metering program, so we're actually able to sell power indirectly back to some of the food processors who contribute food processing byproducts to our system. On the fertilizer side, downstream, that liquid fertilizer is different from the manures and chemical fertilizers the farmers used to buy, but easier to apply and have gotten great results. In this case, on this farm documented by the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, the farmer has achieved a 50% crop yield enhancement on hay and a 30% on corn. So pretty significant. And all, if you think about it, closed loop. I'm going to talk about the resource management side of it in a moment, but the closed loop, I think, is when we talk about renewable energy, at least when I talk about it, this is what I'm talking about. We're taking manure, which resulted from cows eating hay and corn that was grown that year, generally, or within a year, extracting nutrients from the soil and through photosynthesis carbon from the air. That manure goes into our digester, and we generate methane, which is basically converted through combustion in the engine back into carbon dioxide, and the nutrients remain in the train, as I described. That carbon going back into the atmosphere is pretty much the same carbon that was taken out of it in the last year. The nutrients are maybe not 100% the same nutrients because we brought in food byproducts from other parts of the region that may have been shipped from farther away. Nonetheless, generally speaking, they're nutrients that were extracted through this process from the soils. So kind of a closed loop there. And, once we put those nutrients back on the farm, the cycle starts again. On the resource management side, I'll just give you one example, perhaps two. We worked with one of these industrial food processors, and they had been sending their byproducts basically to sewer and some to incineration, liquid byproducts. And in working with them, we helped them to set up a program to better educate their employees as to how to make sure there's good, clean segregation of the food byproducts from any other waste. We worked with them also to make sure that any cleansers that they use for their equipment or floors that might find their way into the stream are biodegradable and compatible with our systems. We also looked at decanting so that they could extract the fats that are in their system and not send us a whole bunch of water, and water itself could go down the sewer or be used for other purposes. So there was a bit of collaboration up front, and this particular customer is also buying electricity back from the system. It's a really nice sustainability story for them, and it's more than a story, it's a reality that we think we can replicate. So, there's really no perfect today, and this is, I don't want this to be misunderstood, so I'm going to be a little careful about it, but, there is no perfect. I think sometimes we're victims of our own passions for improvement and getting there, and sometimes our beliefs or our dogma take us to places without good critical thinking. And I throw out this example, not to criticize certified organic. As you know, we sell products to certified organic. We think it's a really good place to go. But there are always surprises out there. In one example, an agency, a public agency in New England, in the last few years has had built a great facility to compost manure, leaf and yard debris, food waste, food scraps, and wound up with a great organic compost certified for use in organic farms. What they found was that several years ago, was that their compost was actually retarding plant growth or killing plants. And this is a certified organic compost. So all the alarm bells went off. What the heck is going on? What we discovered collectively as an industry was that there were persistent herbicides that found their way into that stream. Clopyralid being one, and other pyralids being that category of herbicides. They're designed to be persistent. They're designed to be put on a hayfield to keep the weeds from growing up so that the grains and the crops can be grown clean and used as animal feed or for other purposes. But the pyralids actually go through the animal body pretty well. They apparently don't harm the animal too much, although I won't swear to that. But you get the manure. You also use these leaf and yard debris, for example, that comes from landscaping. These persistent herbicides are used in landscaping, and you wind up with what you think is a great product, and it turns out you have a problem. So I think the story of this is not that we should give up trying to make organic or closed loop. It just means we have to pay attention. We can't go based on belief. A negative human impact on the environment through contamination and other factors is ubiquitous, and we need to make smart decisions and strive towards continuous improvement. If we say you're either wearing the white hat or you're not, we get into a lot of trouble. We're not looking at the science underlying it. So not to be discouraging, but I think if we go forward with resource management approaches, we're in collaboration, we're looking at whole systems, and if we're relying on our best science, we can continue to successfully move the programs forward. And I guess that's where I'd leave you, is we got to keep working at it.
So when I agreed to talk today, E2 Tech promised me I'd be in an isolation booth up here. I didn't realize I'd actually have to mingle with Jay and Kendall and Alex. And I was going to protest by sitting in my car in the parking garage. But then I realized there wasn't a parking garage. Further realized that nobody would probably care if I didn't speak. So I didn't protest. I'm up here. I'm sharing the table with them. We can work together. I'm going to sound a little bit like an auctioneer here because I got a lot to cover in a short period of time. Northern Tilt undertook a feasibility study for ecomaine looking at organic waste recycling. That study involved 7 different tasks, from waste composition, collection systems, processing technology, site evaluations, looking at partnering with existing organics capacity in the state, markets for organics derived from processing, and then the economics of different configurations of collections and processing. It's a very comprehensive study. I'm only going to be able to address just a couple of these very briefly in the short period of time that I have, and I'm sure I'm going to get pulled off the stage. But what I can say is that ecomaine actually has the feasibility study on their website, so it's available for download. It's a very big document. Don't print it out, please. I think it's 250 pages or so. But the way we put it together, you can read to your various levels of interest. So there's an executive summary that goes over the highlights of it. It might be 3 or 4 pages. Then there's a second level of detail that we call the report overview that goes into more detail in each one of these separate tasks. And finally, there are the chapters on each of these individual ones. So if you're interested in something like the technology review, you can get into that. It's fairly in-depth. So I'm really going to touch on just a couple things, and even doing that, I'm going to talk very fast. In terms of waste composition, the most important thing when we're looking at residential organic waste, or what we found to be most important, was looking at the track record of programs that are already up and running across the country, as opposed to looking at waste composition studies, although we did both. But if you look at programs that, and this is what we were looking at, collecting food scraps, which was inclusive of dairy, meats, compostable paper, things like that, and not including leaf and yard waste, which we found to be already fairly effectively removed from the solid waste stream here. There's a typical range of 7 to 12 pounds per household per week that you'll find in studies across the country and programs across the country. And further, with more mature programs that are more inclusive, that range narrows to about 10 to 12 pounds per household per week. And it's very consistent. If you look at 3 programs right around here, Hamilton, Massachusetts, Brattleboro, and then Garbage to Garden here in Portland, they're right in that range of 10 to 12 pounds per household per week. So that is probably the best determination of what we can get from what we're expecting that we could get from the residential waste stream. So in terms of ecomaine itself, they have the incinerator, and they get approximately 135,000 tons from their owner and associate members of solid waste that comes through the incinerator. Of that, based on what we looked at, if you add the commercial and the residential targeted organics that we were looking at, the compostable materials, somewhere between 36 to 46,000 tons of that is composed of those targeted organics. And what we did for the study then was, so you have that, but not all of that is going to be able to be removed. We looked at 3 different scenarios of removing the waste. The low case scenario was looking at just a residential program for curbside customers, a voluntary program with 35% participation, and on the lower end of the amount that you'd collect per week, and it came up with about 3,100 tons per year of source-separated organics. The mid-range was looking at the higher end of voluntary programs that are incorporated into a regular waste, trash, and recycling haul, of about 45%, a little higher collection rate, and then adding some of the commercial waste, and that was up to about 12,000 tons per year of source-separated organics. And then finally, the high range was looking at a mandatory program where you had about 85% participation, and almost all of the commercial organics that we think could be taken out were taken out, and that was up around 21,000 tons of SSO per year. The thing that I think is fascinating about this chart is it's not until really you get to the medium and high range that you're making much of a dent in that overall portion of the solid waste. It takes a big effort to really make a dent in recycling rates when you're talking about organics. I mean, people talk about it, and we need to be taking that organics out, but it's not an overnight we're going to bump up our recycling rates by a huge percent. We focus quite a bit on collections, because collections, in terms of the economic aspects, really drives whether or not these programs can work or not. And it was a feasibility study. We looked at a lot of different elements, but of course economics was a big one. Typically, the most typical configuration for organics collection is called dedicated collection, and that's simply running a separate route for your organics. So you've still got your trash and your recycling being handled the way it usually is, but you're sending out a separate route, separate truck to pick up organics. It's been done all over. It's done in San Francisco, but one of the problems with it is a very expensive option. So a lot of people talk about the fact that you have a reduction in tipping fee when you go from landfilling or incinerating to composting, and you do. If you look at ballpark figures in Maine right now, it's about $65 per ton in the ballpark for landfilling or incineration. A tip fee at a common tip fee at a composting facility would be in the ballpark of $40 per ton. So you got $25 per ton saving there. But if you then take the cost of a dedicated collection, which in southern Maine is in the ballpark of $10 per household per month, and you take that 12 pounds per household per week, that translates to almost $400 per ton for collection. So the collection costs completely drive the economics of organics recycling for curbside collection. So we did focus quite a bit of time on different configurations that could help reduce that extra cost associated with dedicated collection. Two other models that we looked at aside from dedicated collection. One was called a blue bag model. This is in place in Minneapolis, and what this involves is a compostable bag that residents are given that's fairly puncture resistant, that people put their food scraps, compostable paper in, and that bag's wrapped up and literally goes in the compactor with the trash, goes to a tipping floor, and then goes through a sorting facility and gets pulled out and then recycled. Now these bags, we've actually seen it work. The bags are actually puncture resistant and they do compost, but they won't compost in any composting facility. It takes a certain facility to be able to do it. Anyway, the other one that we looked at was every other week collection. So in the Portland area, what this would involve with the typical model for collections in the Portland area is split body trucks where you have one side of the truck taking the trash, the other side of the truck taking recyclables. And that's once a week. For every other week collection, what you would do is dedicate one of those bins. You'd make it a little bit smaller and dedicate that bin to organics, and that would be collected every single week. And then you would alternate weeks with your recycling and your trash. And this is a big behavioral change, but the beauty here is you've got the exact same trucks, you've got the exact same truck traffic, gas, and everything doing the exact same routes, picking up the same amount of material, but you've now got it separated into 3 groups. It does take a big behavioral change, and something that's scary to people. But the thing that's great about this is it's low tech. It's not a new technology, and it is working. I'm going to talk about that at the end in other areas. I think I'm not going to have time to talk about technology. I just want to say there's a great technology review in there of anaerobic digestion and composting, and it's available to you. But in addition to looking at ecomaine developing its own processing capacity, we looked at existing processing capacity in the state. You all hear me? Is my voice getting into the mic? Am I going too fast? Everybody having fun? Anybody need some coffee? The thing that's very interesting about this map is so we based on what's permitted, most of these are up and running. At the time that I did this, there was about 46,000 tons of processing capacity. So remember, our mid-range scenario from the ecomaine service area was about 12,000 tons per year. The fascinating thing about this is I did this about 1.5 years ago. If I had done this 2 years earlier, there would have been less than half of that capacity. And then, in addition to that, since the time that the report was done, there have been 2 relatively large compost facilities that were permitted down south, and Exeter Agri-Energy up north that already has anaerobic digestion in place is getting permitting for more facilities up there. So the 46,000 now is low, and it doesn't include, if the Brunswick Naval Air Station digester goes in, it doesn't include that as well. So it made sense in going through the study that the most likely option would not be for ecomaine to develop their own facility, but to find facilities that they could partner with, because there does seem to be a fair amount of capacity. So we looked at, in a final economic analysis, a bunch of different configurations for collections and processing. And how am I doing on time? Do I have 15 minutes left? Or? No? Okay. So you didn't really tell me how much I do have left. 5? Okay. 8? That's good. I'm going to listen to Tyler. Okay. So these are 10 different options we looked at. 5 of these options were with ecomaine developing its own processing capacity, and that was either composting alone, an aerated static pile with a roof, so not real high-tech, but not real low-tech either, and then composting in association with dry fermentation anaerobic digestion, and then looking at working with existing partners. And the big take-home message here in the end is really, if you look at the groupings, oh, my hand's shaking. It's just because of my coffee. I'm not nervous. The green is every other week collection. Relatively similar price to not much of a change in price, but the next tier up is the blue bag system, and for that we actually looked at a fairly expensive kind of Cadillac conveyance option, or sort of conveyor system for separating it out. It wasn't simply somebody going into the tip floor at the incinerator and pulling those bags out. It was a very expensive new system for sorting that. That's the next, and then dedicated collection, again, the most expensive options. Another thing to note here is that the difference in these two, in blue, is between composting only and anaerobic digestion, and that's the same here. There was an added cost for doing the anaerobic digestion, which I will discuss. If you look at, for the solid waste, the SSO that would be generated here, it would be a relatively high solids material. It wouldn't be a liquid digestion system that you'd have. You'd put in place dry fermentation if this was a standalone ecomaine system. So and the material, I don't know if you've ever seen the material that comes out of the back end of one of these dry fermenters, but it's not nice looking soil amendment material. There are not many people that would use it. Most of these that are in place, and they're not a whole lot, but there are some, compost the material that comes out the back end. So what that means is you still have all your processing costs associated with the composting, and then you have your anaerobic digestion on top of that. So economically what that means is, so when you put the organic waste into the dry fermentation, that organic carbon gets transformed to biogas, which has about 65% methane. Then you use that methane either to generate electricity or generate heat or CNG. in this case, the revenue that you're getting from that biogas has to pay for the capital and operating expenses of the anaerobic digestion, or else you're losing money. And at the rates that are in Maine right now for electricity or for CNG, it does not work. This does not mean that anaerobic digestion doesn't work, but this standalone model doesn't work. What makes a lot more sense is piggybacking on existing capacity, where it's at a wastewater treatment plant or at a farm where they already have a program in place for the digestate that they're recycling. You know, in the farm model, one of the beauties of it is the solids from the digestate are actually used for bedding. And bedding has become quite a bit more expensive now. So farms get a significant avoided cost by having the anaerobic digestion in place. So it's a whole different economic model. This is just looking at added cost associated with the 3 different configurations we have. And admittedly, this is rough, but it gives you a ballpark figure. With dedicated collection, obviously, the more you have, the less trash you will have, so you can change your routes a little bit. You're going to get a little bit of reduction, but it tends to be quite a bit more expensive. The blue bag model is also a greater cost. In the end, every other week collection really looks great. And this was, I guess this leads me to the next slide. When we first started working on the project, the team that I was working with and ecomaine themselves were all very pessimistic about the idea of every other week collection, because it's such a large behavioral shift for people that, you know, in terms of trash, you know, not going weekly to get their trash. The thing about it is it's in place and it's working in very large municipalities. So we took a tour. Kevin Roach and I, the general manager from ecomaine, took a tour to Toronto. We went to Toronto, the city of Guelph, Hamilton, the region of Peel. These are all very large municipalities, so it represents millions and millions of people, are on every other week collection, and they're getting recycling rates up between 70 to 80%. Nothing high-tech about their process. They often have a MRF associated with them, just like ecomaine does. It doesn't take a huge shift. It just takes a shift in that collections operation. It makes a whole lot of sense. And another thing about it, in Hamilton, Massachusetts, small town just down in Massachusetts, has every other week collection with this split body model. I lost my train. I hate that. Anyway, I think one of the most telling things when we were meeting up here, and it was at the city of Guelph, we talked to the operations manager. We were saying, well, wasn't this a big deal? You know, then people get upset about switching to every other week. And he said they got, you know, when they announced it, people were going crazy. The thought of it, there was a lot of anxiety and anguish about the thought of it. But once they put it in place, they had 2 months maybe of complaints, and then it was completely back to normal. One thing that is different once you get to higher levels of participation is the compost no longer looks like what we're accustomed to in Maine. So, you know, we're sort of getting the cherry end of food waste and commercial waste right now. Once you get your participation rates up higher, you're going to get physical contamination in there. You're going to get more than compost facilities right now in Maine are accustomed to. So the model changes. Essentially, the tip fees have to go up. You have to install a little bit more equipment, and then your markets change. The tip fees go up, and the market for your product is not necessarily the retail end. Up there, they primarily sell it for agriculture, but they do sell it. The farmers like it, but it doesn't look like the compost that sort of really nice compost that Eddie's accustomed to. So it is a big difference. It's a big shift once you get up there. So in terms of the long view, you know what I never said is I'm a soil scientist, and that's my primary interest in organic waste recycling, and I am non-prejudicial about waste. I love all kinds, the organic kind and the kind that aren't organic. I work in all kinds of programs, and there's economics involved here, and that's a lot of what we looked at. In the long run, you know, for me, it's important to get as much of that organic waste that you can possibly recycle responsibly back to the soil. But in conclusion, ecomaine is a very progressive solid waste agency. They're very supportive of the solid waste hierarchy that Jay showed that prioritizes composting and anaerobic digestion above incineration with energy recovery, and that above landfilling. Right now, in terms of the economics of the owner communities in ecomaine, there's not going to be a lot of investment in organics recycling. This is sort of more of a long-term view. It's the type of thing that Portland is looking into in the future, different options, potential configurations for organic waste recycling. It will take a town like Portland to actually put something in place to have other towns follow. It's not something that's obviously going to happen overnight. So in terms of statewide recycling rates, we have been stagnant between 35 and 40% for 10 years. There's been no positive trend in the last 10 years. In order for us to really make a change in that recycling rate, there has to be statewide policy. This is me editorializing now. There has to be statewide policy in order to make that happen. And leadership, it's not necessarily going to happen organically. And every other week collection, I think, if you can do it, it just seems to make a whole lot of sense. Now, in the meantime, there are programs like Garbage to Garden, Resurgam, that show there's a real market out there for people that want to be doing this already without getting it in their curbside, integrated solid waste system. So it makes a lot of sense. ecomaine is very supportive of that because they do support the hierarchy. And just as long as that's being done responsibly, that's obviously a great thing for everybody. So with that, I'll be done.
Everybody hear me okay? Good. All right. Here we go. So I want to thank E2 Tech for hosting this. I was sitting in the waste, energy, and landfill session a few months ago thinking how important it would be to have a conversation about organics, and lo and behold, we're having one. And I'm even more excited to be a part of it because I think about organics diversion all the time. So today I'm going to share with you a bit about Garbage to Garden and what our program offers in the way of the goal of organics diversion. So we started as a curbside recycling option for source-separated organics. So we collect buckets of food waste, nice 6-gallon bucket with a snap-tight lid to keep the critters out and the odors in. And we swap the bucket on the curb for a clean bucket every week. We'll also drop compost if it's been requested by the household, and that's included in the cost. So the program costs to the household $14 a month or a couple hours of a member of the household's time through our volunteer program, which makes the service at no charge. We also service commercial accounts. We do schools, businesses, and events, including South Portland High School back there. Woo-hoo. So the bins in this situation are tipped and cleaned on site, and the cost is based on amounts per week in similar vein to a trash hauler. At the end of each day, the organic material is brought to our organics processing facilities, which in our case at our scale right now is farms. The dirty buckets that we collect are stacked in the truck. You can see a bucket rack on the truck and brought to the shop for cleaning every day. We're hauling as much as 8,000 pounds per day from Portland households, just to give you a figure to chew on. So in terms of residential composting, we've seen other programs designed around community composting sprout up across the Northeast because, like you just heard in Andrew's presentation, the average household puts out about 11 pounds of food waste per week. And every little bit truly does add up. So some are pedal-powered, some are farm drop-offs, some are grant-funded pilot programs like Hamilton that we heard about. All are evidence of a surge in demand for organics recycling. And compared to these programs, Garbage to Garden has grown the fastest and includes more participating households than many of these combined. So there's a lot of innovation still to be made in terms of organics hauling equipment. But suffice it to say that compaction is less important, and managing liquids and waste and weight is more important. So we've got a little ways to go. We're seeing some really good examples out in Europe right now of technologies that handle organics very well. So the first distinction that we like to make is that we are haulers and not processors. So we fill an absolutely vital role in diversion, and that is source separation. How do we get source separation to happen well? That is a big issue when you think about getting people to divert their organics appropriately with very little to zero contamination. So within that is education, and by extension, encouragement, accessibility, and funding. Three major inhibitors to the adoption of organics programs. So by leaving processes or processing up to those that already have land and equipment and the right permitting, we free ourselves up to focus on exceptional quality of service and focusing on that change of behavior from the belly to belly human interaction level. So by working with large scale composters rather than trying to process ourselves, we and the processors that we work with, them having varied feedstocks makes our program able to accept more than just your fruits and vegetables that you would compost in your backyard. So we've got the bones, the seashells, paper products. Those things can break down in the larger scale piles. And the big thing here is we're not reliant on a municipality for funding. So we don't have to wait for a budget approval to act. We act now. We are already doing it, and we're already seeing major progress in just 2 years. So bucket swapping, I just want to talk about this for a minute because it's not the usual traditional approach with these curbside programs. Barriers to adoption of any kind of at-home composting include the ick factor, the work involved, and not getting enough finished compost in return to really validate the effort that you're putting into it. So we target all of these. We utilize a clean bucket to make composting more widely accepted, more mainstream, less niche. We offer finished compost return at no charge, both to encourage people to use the compost locally to grow things, and as an educational piece to show that food waste does indeed turn into compost. And we definitely have a cult following of 2 to 4 year olds that love the big green bucket truck and what happens with their buckets. So we're definitely making strides in the right direction. So we utilize bucket pickup locations to increase the accessibility of our program because the buckets are special, they're unique. You have to obtain a bucket to start the program, which we will drop one off to you. But we also utilize bucket pickup locations, kind of in similar vein to Clink and partnering with in-ground organizations, brick and mortar organizations. And Rosemont Market was one of our first and by far our largest, and the symbiotic relationship there has been invaluable to us. Their focus on local food has really targeted a good starting niche for our program, and we've been able to give back by driving foot traffic to their stores for bucket replacement. I get on the phone every time I get on the phone when I'm working in the office. It's, oh, you need a replacement bucket? Just pop into Rosemont Market and grab one. You're having a party this weekend, you need a couple extra buckets, just pop into Rosemont. Oh, you're starting the program, go to Rosemont. So now we're to the point where, we're servicing roughly 15% of the households in Portland that receive curbside service. We need to increase that convenience factor for a broader section of our society to adopt the program. So we're looking at effective ways or effective places to have buckets available. We love working with Maine Standard Biofuels. A uniqueness to our program is that we enable households to recycle their cooking oil. So we collect used cooking oil in reusable containers or any sort of leftover container that you might have at your house, and we turn that into biofuel for our production to run our trucks off of. So there's cost efficiencies there, but really it's an educational piece, and it allows households to do their part. And it's really about that every little bit counting. And I am amazed at how quickly that vat of oil fills up. You think just those little jars don't matter, but trust me, every little bit adds up. So the key to successful diversion, and perhaps the largest barrier, is education. I already mentioned that. So and that's more than just teaching people how to divert organics. That's empowering. That's engaging. That's making something that's scary and unfamiliar very simple, very straightforward, and when it comes down to it, just downright obvious. Our volunteer program is a way for participants in our program to subsidize their monthly fee. We utilize a number of events, or we partner with a number of events in the area with nonprofits or with events that want to have zero waste. So they've opted to have us compost their waste. We plug in the participants to our program to these events to really close that educational gap and empower our participants and make the program more accessible for all. It's got a big the community engagement factor, I think, has helped grow the program more than anything. We like to say that our volunteer program is our marketing budget, because it's through word of mouth that we've grown. It's through the referrals that we've grown. And yet we also had a community garden at our shop this year, and we're able to donate about 100 pounds of produce to Preble Street Resources. We deliver compost donations to schools and try and make educational bits about it. We had a citywide cleanup that involved about 60 people from Garbage to Garden wearing green t-shirts and walking around the city to collect trash, just as kind of an awareness piece. We have hosted field trips for some schools that compost with us. We now offer composting at events, which is a really big piece in being everywhere. We want composting to be an option everywhere. So once you start to develop that habit, you really don't want to break it based on where somebody goes. You want it to be an option everywhere. And we've utilized strategic neighborhood marketing and then cafeteria composting. I think I actually recognize a couple of these students back there. Bobby, how you doing? So we have certainly encountered the learning curve. So we started 2 years ago, and we've encountered everything from frozen buckets of food waste, massive snowbanks, which actually really help in nestling the bucket. But snowstorms are a different story. Signage is a major challenge to people getting getting people to sort correctly, but one that can be overcome. Tongs, never underestimate the power of tongs in pulling out the trash. They're a trash picker's best friend. Contamination training, where we will literally give somebody back the trash that ended up in their compost bin, because their compost bins are a manageable size, and our operation is hands-on enough to really close that educational piece. Hands-on. Tipping 800-pound toters. Food waste is ridiculously heavy. Container type, colors, size, labels, truck custom bodies, to name a few. So last September, the Maine Department of Environmental Protection's Commissioner, Patricia Aho, said that we have no choice but to think differently about our waste. She talked about composting and the need for a comprehensive waste strategy through regulatory, voluntary, and market-based programs. This organics thing has been a topic for quite a long time now. It's no secret. And what it comes down to is there's no one sure fix. It's a collaboration of efforts that will see the greatest effect. So we have a model that's designed to literally feed food waste back to our local food system by reconnecting food to where the food is grown, to farms, and then also by extension bringing the compost back to homes where people in our community are growing things. So programs like this are the other half of the farm to table to farm. That's the closed loop piece that we're kind of missing in that topic. We love to talk about food, but food waste, it's another story. So participants in Garbage to Garden aren't just composters. They're supporting the localizing of nutrients, sharing of a resource, and revitalizing our topsoil. And we're very lucky to have begun with an operation like Benson Farm, capable of processing the majority of Portland's residential and commercial organic waste currently being composted at this time. We anticipate much greater organic diversion in coming years, and diversifying processing capacity will become increasingly important. So if we can incentivize curbside composting enough to where most people adopt, we have a diversion model that works. And so just to talk about the cost to homes, it's not something new to pay for waste through the home, which is something we don't always think about. We're paying for garbage bags. So if you're taking advantage of volunteering or receiving finished compost and you're living in Portland, you're actually saving money on your overall disposal costs. Garbage to Garden has grown from a very modest 17 participating households obtained at a First Friday Art Walk. We too started with a pickup truck, like Jay, and we now service over 4,000 residential and commercial accounts. We have grown our model to a capacity to match any sized generator, and we believe our community-based model will work hand in hand with official sponsorship by town or municipality. Pulling heavy wet material out of the waste to energy plants has obvious benefits not only to our topsoil, but actually to the efficiencies of the waste to energy process. There can be a great symbiosis between anaerobic digestion and aerobic composting, which is what we do. All in all, organics diversion is a very positive direction to be headed in. There's no going back. There's no question about that. And reaching that 40% organics diversion will not only get us to our state goal that has been set since the 80s, and we haven't yet reached yet, but it will only happen with a collaborative effort. And I believe the future is very bright. So, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Pine. I'm from Maine Standard Biofuels. And before we get started, I just wanted to sort of throw a fun fact out here. How many people in this room like fried food, French fries, anything like that? Okay, so on average, every one of you will produce about a gallon of used vegetable oil per year. Some of us more, some of us less. So, that means in Maine alone, we're talking over 1 million gallons of fuel that had the potential fuel. And right now, our company, we're at about 500,000 gallons, maybe a little bit above, in terms of yearly production. So there's clearly a lot of work to be done in getting that resource in. So we are Maine's only ASTM 6751 biodiesel plant, and I'll explain what those letters and numbers mean later. We're also Maine's only locally owned and operated grease collector. There are other other firms from out of state, but none of them either have operations in Maine, or if they do have operations in Maine, they're just little depots. And then since the beginning, we've always believed in this idea of full circle energy, that there's no waste, that everything is all interconnected, and that's really sort of helped shape the company into what it is today. So what we do is we go around all of New England. Our service area is from Bangor all the way down to Connecticut. We have a fleet of vacuum trucks. We go behind restaurants. We have barrels or larger containers that are full of grease, suck out the grease, bring it back to Portland. Once it gets to Portland, we process it into a clean fuel. And then we also retail that fuel. So we have a retail fuel pump that you can visit if you have a diesel vehicle, or we deliver it as a bulk shipment of heating oil or vehicle fuel. And something that comes up frequently is, well, what would happen to this oil if it wasn't being picked up by us? Well, it does have value, and it is sold on the commodities market, and most of it goes towards animal feed at the moment. So it's used to augment animal feed. The companies that do this, they're called renderers. It's sort of a dirty business. You bring in waste cooking oil, slaughterhouse waste, roadkill occasionally, and it all gets sort of turned into an amalgamated product and sold on the commodities market for things like that. So what is biodiesel? Well, two parts of the word biodiesel. It's biologically based diesel fuel. It functions pretty much the same. It's not chemically the same, but functionally it's pretty similar. I like to call it the ultimate flex fuel because it can be used in anything that uses number 2 heating oil or diesel fuel with little or no modifications. Um, and it's not vegetable. It has its own set of standards, which is what those numbers and letters were all about. Um, it can be made from any fat, so any, vegetable oil, new or used. You can use animal fat. There was a guy in Australia who did liposuction fat, and I don't want to know what that smelled like when it got burnt. Um, sorry. I mean, fun facts in the biodiesel world. We're all a little quirky, and some of us a little weirder than others. It's also 80% less carbon intensive than petroleum diesel, and that's a fairly conservative number. I recently found a life cycle assessment by another biodiesel plant that's sort of a similar scale to us and has similar values, and they calculated that they have a 97.5% reduction in life cycle carbon, which is pretty awesome for any fuel. And then it's also higher performance than regular diesel. It has a higher cetane level, which is sort of like octane for diesel. It's higher performance. It's an oxygenated fuel, so it burns cleaner. It actually has oxygen in the fuel, so you don't have to worry about combustion issues. And because of that oxygen, it has less soot, particulates, unburnt fuel. The emissions profile of biodiesel is vastly superior to that of conventional petroleum diesel. And then it also, for the real performance-minded people, it burns a little cooler, so you won't have, your engine won't be overheating if you do tractor pulls or, I don't know, some other diesel-involved sport. So it's pretty awesome in that way. And it's also a solvent, so it keeps your engine cleaner. So, it cleans out the engine, it cleans out the emissions. It's overall just a really clean fuel. And so here's a sheet of what that number means. The ASTM 6751D is the standard for biodiesel. And these are all of the things that you have to test for when you're making biodiesel. If it doesn't meet these, it's not biodiesel. It's something else. So for us, there's actually two standards. There's the ASTM 6751 1B standard, and then there's the 2B standard, and we meet the 1B standard, and that's a premium grade biodiesel that has superior cold flow properties, and overall it's just a better quality fuel. So that's something we're very proud of. There's very few manufacturers in the region who actually can reach those standards, and we're able to do it with a recycled product, which is wonderful. So let's talk about what biodiesel is on a chemical level. So biodiesel is made in a process called transesterification. Really long word, really simple process. Basically, all you're doing is taking a triglyceride, which is this lovely molecule right here, and you're cleaving off that end. So all the H's and C's and O's over there, that gets chopped off. And so you're left with these long, squiggly hydrocarbon chains, which are very, very similar to diesel fuel. And so we cleave that off, and if I can get Jeff to come up here and Vanna White some stuff in the room, you get this. So this is our actual chemical process right there, and we can pass it around. Please don't shake it up. Here we can pass around some of the fuel. And let's see, what else do I have here that could be fun? Oh, and this is the stuff we actually removed from the fuel. So a couple more. This is the soap that we made. And, if you want to buy any of these samples, I'll be selling them after the. So that divided sample actually shows what happens to our fuel. So the brown gooky stuff on the bottom is the glycerin, which is that end part of the molecule that we're cleaving off, and the top part is our biodiesel, which is all of these chains. So we're cleaving off that molecule, capping off the chains with a simple alcohol, and that's our fuel. It's a very simple process. So, taking a step back, that's the chemical process. Here's what we actually do. So, as I said before, we collect, we bring it back to our factory, and all of our trucks run on our fuel. So, we try to avoid petroleum as much as we can in our vehicles. The first step is decanting. So we take the French fry oil, heat it up, all of the water and French fry heads and shrimp butts and God knows what else is in there falls out, and we send that to Agri-Energy up in Exeter, and they digest it and goes and turns into methane, which is wonderful. From there, the oil goes into pretreatment, so we actually use the glycerin from the previous batch of biodiesel to strip out any contaminants in the oil, and I'll talk about those contaminants in a little bit. So we get a really clean oil before we head into our process where it's transesterified. And in the processor, I'd like to say it's more dramatic, but it's just a giant blender, basically. It's a big heated blender. You add in a strong base, which is our catalyst. You add in the alcohol, in our case methanol, and it just gets mixed up, and the reaction happens. After that, we separate out the glycerin, and it goes to a wash system. So what we're doing is we're removing further impurities from the biodiesel. Right now, we have a combination wet-dry system. So we take the fuel, we spray water through it, and that pulls out any residual salts, soaps, methanol. If there's any particles that are still in there, that pulls it out. And we don't like that because it uses water, it creates wastewater, and it's sort of unnecessary. So we're going to modify our process so it becomes a dry wash system where we use a combination of heat, centrifugal forces, and an ionic bead resin. So it's a charged bead column, and you put the fuel through and it pulls all the impurities out to get rid of our wash water. So we're really excited about that, and that should be up and running within the month. And then from there, it goes into what we call the flash, which is sort of a distillation column. So everything that isn't biodiesel gets boiled off, and that goes for waste processing. And so what we end up with at the end is a very clean, very pure fuel that's made from a renewable resource. So some of the challenges with our process. The biggest one for us is free fatty acids. Now, out of everyone in here who eats fried food, have you ever tried rancid vegetable oil? Has anyone experienced that horrible misfortune of trying some salad dressing that's been in the fridge a little too long and it tastes pretty off? That's what free fatty acids are. They're that molecule, that triglyceride, over time and with heat or just oxidation, will break into little smaller parts. So you'll get a free chain, which is an acid, and that sort of gives it that sour, acrid taste. So that's our first challenge. With high free fatty acids, it makes our process much more difficult. We've been fortunate enough to find a separate use that I'll talk about in a little bit for our free fatty acids, but keeping those levels low is very important. The next challenge for us is all the non-food and hard waste that seems to end up in our oil. So besides the water and all the food waste, we'll sometimes get sponges. I think we've had silverware before, and then we'll also get organic waste that's too bulky to go through the hose or too hard. I think one time we got like a monkey hand or just really weird stuff ends up in our oil. You don't want to know what's in Boston's oil. It's pretty scary stuff. And then our other process issues are water usage, like I touched on before. We want to reduce our water usage. We want to make it a low water process, just because generating wastewater stinks for us. It's an extra cost, and we don't like it because we want to reduce our impact. And then the last challenge is our residue quality. So we like to think of our factories not producing biodiesel and a bunch of other stuff. They're all co-products. They all come out together. So our residuals, our other co-products that aren't biodiesel, we're trying to get our quality up there so that they're marketable and sellable. So I think to talk about that, you have to talk about the flows in and out of the plant. We have oil coming in, methanol coming in, sodium methylate, which is our catalyst suspended in methanol, electricity and water. And we're fortunate because we are able to get RECs for clean electricity, so we have green power at the plant, so get rid of that. And all of our boilers and our trucks run on our fuel, so we sort of get rid of that burden. We're reducing water, so we're good there. But the two things that bother us the most is our methanol and our sodium methylate, because those are traditional chemicals. They're made in a petroleum-heavy industry, and we're looking at ways to change that. And there's actually a really cool project that we're looking at right now. That will deal with that. On the output side, we have our biodiesel, which is wonderful. We can sell that. We sell it for home heating oil. I think, Bonnie, you use our home heating oil, and I'm sure there's a couple other of you out there. So that's good. The food solids, that goes to the methane digester, food, water, methane digester. Right now we're sending our glycerol out because it isn't pure enough to the methane digester, and it's great for a methane digester. It's sort of, it's basically pure carbon and hydrogen. It supercharges the digester, from what I hear. And then our other co-product is soap. So we take those free fatty acids and we transform them into an industrial degreaser, which I think is passing around. It's this stuff. It's the really nasty looking stuff. It's actually a really strong soap. And we sell it to, I think we sell it to Casella now. Garbage to Garden uses it. It's wonderful stuff. So we took care of that. So what I think for me, the biggest thing is, okay, we have all of these carbon-rich foods going out to the methane digester. How can we reincorporate those into the process? Well, methanol and sodium methylate are both made basically taking natural gas and doing something to it so it turns into a liquid. And something that came out recently is this company, they've developed a system that can actually take biogas and turn it back into methanol. And that's something we're actively looking at just because it's super appealing to us that we'd be able to reduce our waste on the back end and reduce our upfront costs and our upfront footprint. So that's something we're looking at right now. So something that's always highlighted in our industry is that waste equals fuel. I know we talked about waste to energy. We're kind of different. And for us, fuel equals money. So when you add that all together, it's waste equals money, and that's something that I'm really happy with our industry. Is we've actually made vegetable oil become a valued commodity. It's very valuable now. It's so valuable, in fact, that we get grease theft. So we've had our containers broken into. We've had locks cut. We've been fortunate enough that we only have people who are cutting locks or going into unlocked containers. Out west, people get their containers stolen, tipped over, and then have it vacuumed up afterwards. Or they'll poke a hole in the bottom of the drum and siphon it out through the bottom. So it's becoming a serious problem. So California actually just passed a law about grease theft, and hopefully it won't be such a problem. But I think it's a good problem to have. It shows that there's value in this commodity, and the restaurants see that value now. They get paid for it. We pay quite a bit out to restaurants for their oil, and that's, I think, a good thing for a resource. It's valued now. It's not seen as something you want to get away, something that you don't want to have in your system. It has a really prominent place now. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, since we are, we're talking about making ourselves more interconnected in terms of energy flows and material flows, I think it's also important to talk about being connected socially. And something that we pride ourselves on is our relationship with other companies like Garbage to Garden or Casella or AgriCycle, as well as these other fuel distributors. We're able to go out and we're actually, integrating ourselves more fully with the waste systems in the state and throughout the region. And I think that makes, like Garbage to Garden was saying, is a more robust system when you have your community involved and you have people interested in what you're doing. And that concludes my talk.
Great, thank you, Alex. Being a chemist myself, I'm very excited about that last talk. Trans-esterification will be on the quiz coming up. We have time for a few questions. I'm going to kick it off. The first one for Andrew. I've got 2 barrels at home. One's for single stream recycling, both picked up curbside by Casella. The other for the stuff that doesn't get diverted to my compost pile. And I put those both out every week. In the scenario where you alternate every other week, does that mean I have to double the number of cans I've got to maintain that?
There would be a little bit of a change in volume, but the one thing that I didn't say, remember I had that moment where I forgot what I was going to say?
Oh, yeah.
This is it, so this is a good segue. The fact that you have every other week collection really drives the traditional recyclable rates up. So at the same time that you're getting the organics, you're also driving up the recycling rate. So it's very possible that one of your containers, the recyclable one, might need to increase in size. The trash probably won't. It might a little bit, but what you're doing is you're taking the organics out. Now the organics are dense, so there's not as much volume there, but you take the organics out, plus you're going to, what we've seen, what's been seen across the country is you're taking out more recyclables. So that volume probably won't change much, but the recyclables will probably have to increase in size.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Yes.
First off, I have a comment for Kendall. We got our first, Deborah and I got our first compost delivery this week, and it looks fantastic.
Oh, good.
We'll see how it works on the tomatoes next year.
Good, let us know.
I have a question. I want to focus it toward Jay, but it may be relevant to everyone else. It has to do with both the wood-to-energy area and perhaps the anaerobic digestion. The state of Maine seems to be very wound up over this issue of getting more natural gas out of Pennsylvania and Maine. And yet, the whole panel's been talking about a whole bunch of chemicals that are carbon and hydrogen. I'm from the Hydrogen Energy Center, by the way. My name is Sherry Higginbottom. Methane, which is natural gas, is a very simple chemical.
I'm sorry, is what?
Methane, which is the primary substance of natural gas, is a simple chemical, it's CH4. We have forests over 90% of the state of Maine, which are full of carbon and hydrogen compounds. We have carbon and hydrogen compounds that we're trying to find a way to remove. We have carbon emissions that we want to deal with. And I'm just curious, Jay, what your thoughts are on how we can use the output from, for example, the wood-to-energy processes to produce methane, more methane, perhaps through the input from the chemical engineering department at the University of Maine, who is having a more difficult time because the pulp and paper industry that they rely on so much is going down. This all seems to be a chemical engineering problem where we could get a lot of methane and we may not need that pipeline in Pennsylvania. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Sounds like a great idea. Sounds like a great idea. I really don't. I'm not a chemical engineer. I mean, what you say on the face of it certainly makes good sense. You know, we're focused on those local closed loops, and we do a lot of work with the paper industry. Certainly corroborate the fact that there's a decline, and it sounds like a great idea. It's not really our field, I'm afraid. It should be, I think, but it isn't.
I have a comment on it. One of the elements that we looked into in the feasibility study was the value that we would get from biogas, and the natural gas. It's I don't know if you call it, I don't know what metaphor to use. It's not really a chicken and egg thing, but as we get more natural gas, we actually have less incentive to make biogas projects work. So in our case, initially we were looking at the 10 cents a kilowatt hour that you could get locked in for renewable electricity that could come from a digester that the PUC was giving. That even is no longer there, and part of it is there's such a there's becoming a bigger and bigger spread in the price of getting electricity from something like a digester and getting it from natural gas, because there's just more natural gas out there. So I guess the bottom line is it seems like it would have to be policy driven, and in the last few years anyway, we seem to have been as a state, and because of economic realities nationwide, steering away from those incentives that we're giving to renewable sources. It's not a slam dunk. I mean, I know they were looking into cellulosic lignin at the University of Maine. It's not a lot of these. They're the sources that are out there, but they're not going to compete directly at this time with natural gas on price. So in order for those to work, there would need to be grants and a policy, a state or federal policy that supports that kind of research.
Which University Maine would presumably work on.
Right.
Well, and certainly the chemistry is there, but it's all about economics. And the reports this morning of we're all happy to see price of gas and oil drop for our driving habits, but that has a definite effect on folks who are trying to produce those fuels and the price they can get in the market, which then upsets their economic model. So we're in a global market, and it applies here in Maine as well.
One other thing on that, I think this probably goes without saying, but the cost side is also an issue. It's pretty clear that all of the costs that we incur socially in our fossil fuel sources are not reflected in the price. So if they were, we might not need the subsidies.
Another question? Yes.
think in one way or another, I'm either a direct or indirect customer of all of you guys. My question is for you, Kendall. I lived in Seattle a number of years ago, and there's a municipal composting system there, and you would get in really big trouble if you sorted to put your trash or recycling in the municipal compost and yard waste bin. Now, because Seattle made a lot of money, the city selling to large organic composters. I think that's because Seattle's a much bigger city, obviously, and also there's a huge agricultural industry within very close driving distance. But do you currently or see a future revenue stream from selling the compost, or do you just return it all to me right now?
That's a good question. So we don't, we're just haulers, so we aren't processing and we aren't owning the finished product. But certainly because of the relationship that we have with our customers and the fact that we're actually asked regularly to deliver compost and donate compost and deliver extra compost here and that kind of thing, there is an opportunity, I think, to make it a sustainable operation. I don't know how much revenue can be pulled from that, but certainly opportunity there always. So yeah.
Time for another question. Yep.
Two-part question for Kendall.
Yeah.
One, do you accept raw meats and do you encourage people to put in raw meats? And then secondly, what do you do about cleaning the buckets? How do you confirm that they're clean? Because it seems like you're taking on some of the liability of them being clean when you return them and do something.
Yeah, great question. So yes, we do accept raw meats. We accept bones, pretty much any organic waste with the exception of any pet litter. So we kind of remove that because of the sort of hands-on nature of our service. With the washing of the buckets, we use a very high temperature that is EPA approved to sanitize. So that sort of combats that issue.
212 for 30 minutes, is that what you do?
Do you? I don't wash the buckets personally. Maybe. That sounds
Good
pretty.
answer. Good answer.
It's very hot.
It is hot. They should. We haven't had any problems in this, that's for sure. But certainly, we're not asking people to eat off of them either. I mean, I think that our cleaning process is quite thorough. It's not really an issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One last brief question. Go ahead.
Just a quick question, Linda. Do you, I'm with the Maine Technology Institute, and these guys all gave great presentations, and I'm just so happy to see the commercialization around this area. And I was just wondering whether everybody's close to profitability. I don't know if you can share that, or getting close to it, because we'd really like to hear that kind of success.
Getting there.
Yes.
I can.
We're actually fairly close. We're hoping probably sometime next year, I think. I think that's the plan.
Seconded. The model is very promising. It's also a very capital-intensive business.
I'm a consultant. I'm supposed to make money all the time, but I'm not very good at it. So I don't think you're really asking for me.
Push up your rates.
How about Casella?
And on the two technologies that I spoke about, anaerobic digestion and composting, the composting has been around since 1989, 90, and that model is profitable for us. The digestion is really a pioneering effort. It is marginally profitable. I would say that if we were looking to build 5 more, which I guess we are, if you were an investor and you were willing to accept returns that are more typical of a utility, maybe 10% or something, we think we can get there. It's not right now. It doesn't seem to be the fodder for equity venture capitalists who are looking for 20 or 30% IRR, but it is marginally making money now, and we think that's great because we started out, I mean, it was a complete learn-as-you-go process. So I think there's definitely a future there. You have to learn how to do it.
Maine Institute of Technology does invest in new technologies, and some of you have taken advantage of them, so we look forward to that.
Great. Just have a few more brief notes, but I did want to take a moment to thank our speakers. So round of applause. Thank you very much. They will be hanging around for a little bit after the talk, and we encourage you to continue to network. We also want to thank Jeff and Brianna and Cindy for helping set this up. Thank you to our sponsors, St. Germain Collins, Eaton Peabody, TRC, Fairchild, 19 Oaks, and Maine Biz. Please join us next month on November 20th for a talk about remediation on the environmental side of cleaning up our sites out there. Please take a look at the fall brochure on your way out for more information about E2 Tech. And if you are not a member, Jamie, others, please join. You're a member now? Awesome. Thank you very much. And also then your badges, please recycle them at the desk on your way out. And thank you very much for coming today.
Thanks.
All right.